Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 325 of the Psych Files. Michael Britt here. Well, let me ask you a question. Do you love your work? Do you feel that it's a passion of yours? It's more than just a job that you go to. It is something that you feel very deeply about. It has meaning and purpose to you. If so, guess what? You're probably being exploited. And by that I mean that quite possibly you are being asked to do things on your job that wouldn't normally be asked of people who do a job that typically isn't associated with passion. Your boss might think that it's okay to ask you to do things he or she probably would not ask other workers in jobs that do not have passion. So we are going to explore that today. Typically, we associate jobs with passion with jobs that are in the arts, for example, jobs that have a lot of creativity to them. But they could be other sorts of jobs in which you are helping people. Maybe you are a psychologist, a social worker. And we've got some examples coming up, but it could be someone who works with animals and you see it as your purpose, save them. I've got an interview with two researchers, Troy Campbell and Shepard. And they're going to talk about a study that came out in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. And I think you're going to find this to be really, really interesting, especially if you're the kind of person who is really looking forward to working in an area that you feel has some special purpose or meaning for you. Okay, this interview pretty much explains itself. Now, I have talked about having passion for work, and we talk about it so much in our society. And we all want to love the work that we do. But the idea of, I need to find, passion, work that I'm passionate about. Well, as one author said, look, if you're just going to sit around and wait for it to hit you, that's probably not going to happen. You need to instead try a bunch of different things, see which of those things people really think you're good at. And then when you pursue that, you'll get so much positive feedback that you'll probably end up saying to yourself, your work is a passion for you. So anyway, however you come upon this or pursue this, there is a kind of a dark side to doing work that you really, really feel is meaningful and important. And that is what researchers Troy Campbell and Shepard are going to talk about today. So let's jump right into the interview. I am here speaking with Troy Campbell and Shepard. They are part of the research team behind the article that I found. This was in the JPSP, as we call it, our Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Understanding contemporary forms of exploitation, attributions of passion serve to legitimize the poor treatment of workers. Okay, so I think it's a really interesting topic. But let me first ask Troy and Steve if they would just kind of tell us a little bit about their backgrounds and the courses that they teach, that sort of thing. So who would like to go first?
My name's Steve Shepard. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at Oklahoma State University. And my research is on a lot of different topics, but mostly on domains related to ideology.
Ideology? That sounds very heavy. What is that?
Very broadly, political ideology, religious ideology, and how these things intersect with topics in marketing. But I cast a pretty broad net. So
is your degree, is it in business or psychology?
It's in psychology. It's in social psychology.
Social psychology. Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, not unusual. I have a friend who has a degree in social and teaches in the business department. A lot of back and forth there. Okay. And Troy, tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Troy Campbell. I'm an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Oregon, and my undergraduate is in psychology. My graduate degree, where I met Stephen, is from Duke University, and that is in marketing and consumer psychology. And my professional experience often is a lot in entertainment. So I was a Disney Imagineer, worked a lot in web and media. My research is at the corners, and when I get it right, at the intersections of business, psychology, and art. And in many ways, this project is very much at that intersection of how psychological effects are affecting how we judge people, often in the arts, but it can be any job people have passion for in business. And so it's a very close to my heart project.
Now, let me just ask, what is a Disney Imagineer?
So Disney Imagineering is the research and design branch of Disney. So that is the people that design everything from the parks, rides, experience, technology. And it's just a really wonderful place that I was at for a while. And actually do prefer being an academic more than a Disney Imagineer because you get to do more projects and you have a little more freedom. But I'm very happy for the time that I spent there.
Interesting. Okay. All right, so let me, just a brief story to let the audience know why I contacted you in part, because I saw the article, and so I do some, as I mentioned even in the last episode, so I do some community theater on the side, and every once in a while I get to work with equity actors, union actors, and it sounds great. I mean, a lot of people want to be an actor, right? But then what I learned was that is really, not only does it pay poorly, but it's a rough life. You're always looking for your next job. They're not just the actors, assistant directors. There's all these support folks. And one of them who I keep in touch with on Facebook posted that she posted an article, which I'll put on my website, which just kind of points out something that's been going on for a really long time, which is that people in the theater are expected to do all kinds of extra work, to work long hours. They only get a day off. So in a way, I started to think about your article. So yeah, that's just exploitation. Because supposedly this is what you refer to as a passion career. Is that the term you use?
Yeah, a job in which you're pursuing passion, and there's any job you can have passion in, and of course in the studies we take the same job and between subjects manipulate whether the person is presented as having passion or not. But yeah, and it's and that exploitation is happening in there, and it's not just hours. Like a lot of friends who work in Hollywood, it's treatment. It's like actually how you are treated on a daily basis and dehumanized, and the way that casting calls work, and all these times where it would be very easy for the people in these situations to be kinder and nicer and more accommodating to people, but they choose not to be. And potentially one of those reasons is because of the psychological effects we're finding around the legitimization of passion exploitation.
Yeah, here's another example. And so, as you were speaking, so I saw, as most of the world has, Avengers Endgame, and the thing is like mostly special effects. And I had read an article some time ago where they said that the young folks who do, not always young folks, the folks who create those special effects work their asses off, and they don't make much money. They are exploited because it's, who wouldn't want to help create the Hulk in a Hollywood movie? I'm sure it's fascinating work, but apparently they work really, they're taken advantage of.
Yeah, that's another domain too, where you see a lot of that. Anything with any kind of artistic element, it seems like there's a lot of that.
Yeah, it's almost as if we don't like it if people enjoy their work too much, because then we take advantage of it.
Well, I think that's a thing that relates a lot to research. Aaron Kay, who is one of the researchers on the project, and then, of course, Jay Kim, who's the lead researcher, and this project is really his baby. But he is very busy with the market right now, so he has sent us, and we are very happy to be here. But it relates also to sort of stuff we'll get down to, and Stephen will hit on because it's closer to his super expertise, which is that we have these compensatory psychologies, right, Stephen?
Yeah.
I've never heard that term. What does that mean?
Basically, we want to see the world as a fair place. Good things happen to good people, and that belief comes from a lot of different places. And often it comes from seeing different trade-offs as okay. These group of people have these traits, they don't have these traits, but that's okay. They kind of balance out. Women are stereotyped in one way, men are stereotyped in another way, but on balance, they have their own skills and downsides. And likewise, it seems like people in the context of what we look at here with passion exploitation, it seems like people see enjoyment of work and being passionate about it as a trade-off, basically, and trading off for payment. And it's like, well, you don't get paid, but you get this other thing out of it, and that's okay. Yeah, and it just helps us see the whole thing as fair, as opposed to a form of exploitation. So maybe why don't you give us kind of an overview of your study? What did you do exactly? So the basic idea is that when people are passionate about their work, we are more inclined to legitimize exploiting them. And that can mean a lot of different things. It can mean assigning them more work and not compensating them financially. It can mean asking them to do jobs, potentially demeaning jobs that are outside of their actual job description, and essentially taking advantage of the fact that they're passionate. And that seems to stem from the belief that they would volunteer for this work anyway because they're passionate, and also seems to stem from the idea that passion is sort of its own reward, and that they are being sort of compensated in the form of passion and enjoying the work. And thus it's seen as more legitimate to not compensate them or ask them to do these other tasks. That's sort of the general idea. And we look at this a lot of different ways, different studies, different experiments that we did to sort of provide support for this hypothesis.
And I think it's useful to jump in and just state this, is that this paper shouldn't be read as an anti-passion paper. You know, there's tons of research that suggests that when somebody's following their passion, like all three people on this podcast are doing right now, we have a more fulfilling and meaningful life. And so really what this paper really is about is we're identifying a psychological tendency that people have. And you can see the paper as a warning that we should not let this cultural zeitgeist emphasis on finding passion, which has many good things, be co-opted by this tendency towards the legitimization or ignoring the exploitation of people who are passionate about their work.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, it's really ingrained in us as a society and at a young age to be passionate about something, to find your passion, to pursue your passion, that you want to be passionate about your work. There's certainly a strong emphasis on that, and it's almost universally talked about in a positive way. And so what we're just kind of showing is the sort of maybe dark side of that, or some of the potential negative outcomes.
Right.
And this complicated way that it's almost not even a dark side of passion, but a dark side of how people will treat you for having passion. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Though there, of course, can be dark sides for passion, but that's a little outside the scope of our paper right now.
So, well, you worked for Disney, we know. Oh, I don't know, Stephen. Mm-hmm. So did both of you have at some point some other sort of passionate career that you were exploited? I mean, what the heck made you want to study this thing? Did the two of you have personal experience, or what made you? Well, I know, and there are other authors involved in this as well.
Yeah, so the lead author, Jay, he's from Korea, and he talked about this idea of passion pay or passion wages, which in Korea is referred to, it's a term that's used to refer to this idea that if you're passionate about something, you will deal with mistreatment, you'll deal with not being paid, being underpaid. And that's sort of where it came from. It really resonated with me. My wife and I, we volunteer for animal rescues and foster animals and things like that. And there are definitely cases where the rescue, they will want to, say, pull dogs from a shelter, and they need to find someone to foster them. And not necessarily intending to take advantage of people, you're going to end up asking the people that you think won't say no, right? You're going to ask the people that are going to say, sure, I'll take that dog in, even though, say, we said we wanted a break, or we needed a bit of time in between fostering dogs, or they say, well, here's 3 dogs. Well, we originally said we could take 1 or 2, but now we're being presented with 3. And it's just kind of like pushing those boundaries a little bit. And it doesn't necessarily have to be malicious. It's just, I think, a byproduct of the real situation that they're put in, where we need to solve these problems. We need to get these things done. And when it comes down to it, we're going to ask the people and sort of ironically maybe end up relying a little too heavily on the people that are passionate about what they do.
Yeah. And my experience at Disney and at Duke were both very good. I feel like when you're around a lot of psychologists and people who study things related to this, they're very looking out for people. But, as a person who's done a lot of things with media and other things like that, there is just this idea, which is I call it the kid who loves Photoshop problem, which is if you're in a group of students or you're in a work group, everybody's like, we'll work for 2 hours on the thing and you'll do that Photoshop thing. And they sort of know it's going to take you 4 times as much to do what they're doing. But they're like, well, you love Photoshop, so you should do this. Mm-hmm. And sort of ignoring the fact that it's work it's not always my favorite thing to do, and I have other passions, and this is conflicting with them, or even just other requirements. I think anybody who's been in anything artistic or save the worldly or save the animals can feel this. I think this is one of those studies that I think everybody sees themselves in, right? Whether you're passionate about your children, you're passionate about your community, and people will at times take advantage of you. So I think this is one of the studies that people say, oh, that is it, right? So there's some theoretical advancement that we're doing, but I love this sort of daily conceptual clarity that some of this research and some other work Stephen and I have done before, I think really works in with that.
All right. Okay, so what was the methodology, if you will, behind this?
One of the first just kind of basic experimental ideas that we came up with, I don't think we actually ran it first. I think we ran the experiment ones just to check it. But sort of the one that, we were thinking about is if we just asked people about a bunch of different careers and to rate it on passion, would one group who rated it on passion, if we looked at the average passion rating, and then we asked another group of people with those same careers rated on how it was okay to engage in certain forms of exploitation in these situations, would they rate it higher? So would there be independent samples? We still find a correlation with this, right? So that it seems more okay to ask somebody in a job we see as more passionate, whether it's artists, social work, versus something else like bill collecting or clerk. And Stephen, you have that family example that I think really fit in with the ideation of this experiment.
Yeah, so my dad, he worked in a steel factory for 30 years, union job, clock in, clock out, and no one's asking you to stick around for an extra 20 minutes. You get paid for work, and then work stays at work, and you go home. And I think with this correlational study that Troy is talking about, it just kind of nicely illustrates this point that there are certain careers that we just sort of accept this idea that, oh yeah, you'll be asked to stick around longer, work more hours without pay, and that it's completely absurd in other contexts with other careers. And so we just kind of capture that by getting, like Troy said, these average ratings for all these different careers. On average, how passionate are workers in this space.
The more highly they rated a career as being passion related, the more likely they would say.
The more passionate one group is rating it, the more okay with exploiting it another group is rating it. Okay. And this is a correlation. We have some experiments that we're going to get into, but I also just want to take a moment. I know a lot of students listen to this podcast, but how do you do good correlational research? And if you have the time, check out this paper. We think this study one does it pretty well, where we're dividing up different groups of people. So we're separating the questions. So it's not going to be biased by the same people answering things. We're not even going to have to worry about order effects because it's two separate samples. We're also asking different groups of people not all of the things to avoid burnout.
Asking too many questions. Yeah, good point, Troy. I mean, I taught research methods for longer than I can imagine. And I mean, they're all taught the same way. You start out by having students put together a survey and correlate the answers to questions. And then we taught it in a 2-semester format. And in the second half, the students are asked to create a simple experiment. And so what you show here is exactly that. The first one is a correlational study, a survey, and then you turn it into an experiment. And at this point, I asked Stephen exactly what the participants were asked to do when they came into the study.
The general design is we are going to present somebody in a career, and sometimes that person is an artist. In other experiments, that person is a consultant. In other studies, those people are students. And we're going to recruit different samples of people. And sometimes that's a general sample. Sometimes that's an actual manager. And we also vary the situation. So sometimes the person is retiring. So there's no thing that the person could get extra work so that it would help them advance their career. And sometimes that person isn't retiring. And we do a couple different versions of neutral passion in these situations. So we got an artist, say John, working in a art job, making about $45,000 a year. And we're describing the person either as just liking the job, or we add in this idea that his passion for art is one of the most powerful driving forces behind his work at the organization. And just adding that statement of passion and a description of a worker with a couple more details in there, we see affects how people respond to the legitimacy of asking this person to do things and what they're assuming about the person.
But what exactly were they asked to
So the dependent variable, it includes things like asking people how okay is it, how legitimate is it to ask this person to, come into work on the weekend and basically they lose their family time, do extra work without pay, clean the bathrooms, the office.
When it's not part of their job description.
When it's not part of their job description, exactly. Dress up like a clown, entertain kids at a work party. These kinds of things that are well outside the job description and or are not financially compensated.
And then that's a 1 to 7 Likert scale, if I recall right.
Yes. Right.
So the more I think, the higher I give that, it's okay to ask the person to dress up like a clown, then the more willing you are to exploit that person.
The more likelihood you're saying it's legitimate to allow them to do it. And then, of course, we're going to sort of probe at sort of potentially what is going on in the head, or at least a rationalization. And these two questions that we ask in the situation, in addition, of course, we're measuring their perceived level of passion, so checking, manipulation checks, allowing for correlational and mediation designs, analyses. But we're asking these questions, how much would this person volunteer for this? And how much is this work its own reward? And across different experiments, we're seeing those operate different, sometimes mediating the mechanism, though the mediation, as you'll see across the study, kind of varies between those, which suggests that probably what's happening in the mind is quite a few different thought processes around what we're thinking in this situation. Oh, this person would volunteer for it. Oh, this is a reward in it itself. Oh, this is just okay because this person's happy to be here. And there's probably quite a few different rationalizations that are occurring due to the underlying psychological mechanisms.
Now, is that where you're talking about belief in a just world as one of those mechanisms?
Yeah, and that, people who are really motivated to see the world as a fair place, right? They look at the situation where this worker isn't getting paid for extra work, and to think that that could be you, or to think that you could be the manager that's unfairly asking people to do this. I mean, it's not the most comfortable thing to think about. You don't want to think of yourself as subject to that. You don't want to think of your organization as the kind of place that might do that to you, or just the economic system in general operating in that way. And so those people, they're people who are higher in a belief in a just world, who want to see the world as kind of a fair and just place. They're particularly motivated to use these kinds of rationalizations to say, no, this isn't exploitation. It's okay. They would do this anyway, or they would volunteer for it anyway. It makes them happy. It's its own reward.
Yeah, and then within some of the analyses, you'll see that for people who hold a higher belief in just world, the way that their assessments of passion, their assessments that the person would volunteer anyways, and their belief that it's okay to exploit them are statistically tighter together, suggesting that this belief in just world is at least playing some positioning in this effect that we're seeing. One of the future directions we have for this project is to bring in the concept of focalism. So if you know about focalism bias, that's the idea that we tend to focus on one piece of information and not think about other pieces of information. So probably what's occurring here in these studies is that people are thinking about this person as having only one passion. And so they think, well, it's okay to potentially exploit this person in this situation because they don't have they're not thinking that there's a trade-off that this other person is doing, right? If I make the Photoshop kid work 8 hours on the project instead of 2, that's fine because he's the Photoshop kid. What else is he, right? But we all have these many passions. And so one of the things we're potentially going to do in future research, but also something I just do in a lot of my teaching, is I talk to my students about what I call the plurality of passions, is that we all have many different passions, right? So I'm a huge comics person. We know our host likes to do theater on the side, and Stephen likes video games a lot. We have other hobbies and passions in our lives, and all of us could list probably 5, 6, 7, 8 of those. And an ability to sort of balance those passions, I think, is an important thing.
So you're saying you, in your description of John, you focused on only one of his passions. And we tend to do that, right? We tend to think, well, that guy's an actor. That's that's what he does. Even though, many. I remember, what actors do I remember? I don't remember their names, but I know that they do art on the side. They paint, like that. But we focus on their acting.
Yeah, and if we don't have other information about people, that's what other research shows we do. My students, so obviously I talk a lot about this research with my students, and my students bring up this idea of the major inference, which is this kind of play on words, which is whenever they talk to someone, they say, "What's your major?" Right. And that becomes the major inference you draw about that person, and you draw all these assumptions about these people. And one of the things we do in my class as sort of a debiasing thing is we put on one side of the wall what is a group you belong to, and what's one way you totally are not in line, at least with the stereotype of that group. Idea. It's very useful for a ton of different things, but it's very useful for this.
Yeah, that's a neat idea. So, yeah, I mean, that's social identity theory there, right there, right? I mean, Stephen, you're the one who teaches social psych, I assume, right? You teach social identity, Taj Fell, all that stuff. So I'm when I talk about that in class, I think, well, so I'm middle-aged, I'm male, I'm a psychology teacher. Those are all like identities. But I like your idea of me saying, okay, so how am I not like the stereotypical college professor, asking students to do the same thing?
Yeah. We just as an aside, because I obviously love bringing in things I care about. So media and representation, I like doing it with my students who at the University of Oregon and in the business school are mostly white. And I say, when you see a movie, do you see every white character as just you? Like if there's a white character on screen, you're like, oh, that's me. And of course, what they say is no. And I say, well, thus when we increase and get a couple minority characters in media, that doesn't mean that everybody is now seeing themselves in this media because we aren't this one thing, a part of ourselves.
Really interesting to me is your concluding remarks, the final paragraph on page 27. Because as I was reading your article, I thought, oh, wow, I mean, maybe I've done that. Have I exploited? And then I started to think about when I had we had a graduate program where I taught, and so we had graduate assistants, and I asked myself, so did I ask them to do extra stuff? Maybe I did. I started to feel a little guilty there.
There's a lot of discussion now in any area of behavioral research, whether it's marketing, management, psychology, on how participants in our studies are paid. Increasingly, researchers are using online panels like Amazon's Mechanical Turk. Mm-hmm. Traditionally, they've been paid very little. The market does not demand that you pay them a lot of money. You can get all the participants you need, paying them 20 cents to do a study that's a few minutes long, which ends up being below minimum wage. And there's not a lot of external incentive, like I said, to change that. You get all the participants you need, paying them very, very little, and that's just sort of the norm.
How are they passion workers, though?
Well, so what's interesting is that some of the early research on this, like when people started using these panels and there are people writing papers being like, wait, who are these people that are doing these studies? That research found that a pretty important driver for people doing these things, they just find doing surveys fun. They just figure, I'm just sitting on the couch, I'm not doing anything, I'll do some surveys and earn a little bit of Amazon credit, and it's fun. I find them interesting, I find them engaging. And it's actually very easy to fall back on that as a researcher, as a reason to not pay them a lot of money. But increasingly, people are using it as a means to supplement their income. Or, we have lots of, I don't know if it's an increasing number, but there certainly are people in that pool that don't have a job, who have been laid off, who are unemployed. It's an interesting marketplace, and there's more discussion now happening around how much do we need to pay these people a minimum wage, and that's increasingly more and more people are coming to that opinion. But I think it's a good example of this kind of thing where one of the main reasons we fall back on for paying very little is like, well, they like it, they like doing it. So
and I think this is a good point where we pull out this card, as we say, we are not philosophers and we're also not policymakers. And we're not kind of coming out here to say what's right or wrong, or we're not being as pompous to think that we could design the policy system that fits all these. And trying to regulate passion exploitation can be very, very difficult, and could have some really, really negative side effects. So we're not here to tell you how to exactly do that. We're here to be the good psychologist, which says, here's a psychological tendency. that you need to be wiser about. And here's some ways that it works. At the end of the paper, we bring up something that, we're not coming down exactly on how we should pay people online, but this is one of the things to think about. And I think a lot of us have thought about not how we change, but just be more aware. We have the students write, it would be illegitimate for my boss to ask me this because of my passion. It would be illegitimate to ask the Photoshop kid in the group, or insert different type of kids in the group, to do this. It would be illegitimate to ask my professor to do this. For instance, answer an email within 5 hours on a Saturday night. But lots of kids don't think through all these things, and it's hard to. Our research suggests that potentially we're not always doing it. We have this tendency.
Hopefully, in many areas, as students study psychology, they ask themselves, wow, how am I doing that? Or they ask themselves, well, what's the solution? And it's hard. I mean, the woman who posted the article about how theater workers are exploited, she said, I don't know what the solution is. Does anyone else? And other people just said they don't know either. Probably it's along the lines of what you just said, Troy, which is that theater worker's boss has to be aware of this tendency. Why do we force actors to do 8 shows a week and 1 day off? Okay, so what if somebody says, all right, yeah, that probably is too much. Well, now you're going to have to change a whole industry. I don't know.
Yeah, so related to that, I mean, all of the authors on this paper have done research on, system justification theory, which is basically this idea that it's similar to belief in a just world, but it's kind of more specific to these kinds of social systems and institutions that we want to see as legitimate and operating kind of fairly and justly. It can be the government, it can be our work organization, it can just be kind of social norms, just kind of how society operates. And this is how society operates, especially certain domains, right, where it's just very common and expected that you have to do this extra work with no pay, or you have to, like you said with acting in the arts, right, you are expected to put in these kinds of hours and get treated in a certain way. And that's just sort of the way it is. And people are quite resistant to change. I mean, that's kind of the general theme of our research in that space on system justification theories, that people want to see these systems as fair. They want to support sort of the status quo and sort of defend it in a lot of different ways. And so there are those kinds of hurdles to overcome. In the video game industry, I mean, there is, as one space where people talk about crunch time. This game has to get out in a certain window of time, so you're all pulling 14-hour days or working 6-7 days a week. There is more discussion about, unionizing, labor in that space, in part because that would be more of a systemic change. It would more clearly define what work is, how work is compensated, and what you can and cannot ask of your employees as an employer. And it's kind of does create a structure around that.
I could definitely see video game workers being exploited, because that's sort of like acting, I guess. Who doesn't want to play video games for a living?
And Jay has this nice way of saying it all the time when he gets this question, which is, he says, it may be true that people get a little bit more reward for working in things that they're passionate. But in an ideal world, in the world we want to live in, we don't want to make a world where people have to sacrifice so much for one passion. Mm-hmm. And I think that is sort of one of the takeaways. I also suggest the idea, which is, this is in no way justifying any exploitation. But I still think it's important for students to think about, am I going into a career that is going to allow me to pursue the plurality of my passions? And we should fix certain places that are exploiting people. But you also, as the individual, have the choice to go into that or not. And that if you go into it, it does not justify in any way whatsoever the exploitation that is done to you. But just as a rational actor in the world, you should think about that and do a lot of interviews with people in the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's great advice. Well, listen, that's all of the questions that I have. I think it's a really, really neat piece of research. Has it been summarized for the layman online?
If you just Google legitimization of passion exploitation, Duke University, there is a press release that we spent quite a bit of time writing, such that we could get it in as few words and as quickly as possible, and also be something that you can share and send with other people.
All right. Well, I did a quick search. I found an article on Duke called "Love Your Job. Somebody may be taking advantage of you." Is that the one you're referring to? Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, that's it.
By one of the other researchers for your paper, right? Aaron Kay. All right, they were.
I mean, we all wrote it. It's out at Duke University where Aaron is, so of course it is. It's Aaron's paper.
Okay. All right. So
as anybody in academia knows how things work in the press.
All right, so I'll link to that from the website as well. All right, guys, thanks so much. Really, really interesting work, and I wish you more luck with the future research.
Well, thank you very much.
I hope everybody can follow their passions in a healthy, balanced way. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much to Troy and Stephen. Really appreciate it.